Boris Johnson resigns. Brittany Griner pleads guilty. The EPA and the Supreme Court. Oh, but first, among many things that we're going to talk about on this Saturday, July 9th, civil rights fame attorney Ben Crump was in Baltimore on Wednesday, and it's all about educational malpractice. He joined the lawsuit suing the Baltimore City Schools. Take a listen.
The lawsuit is asking a judge to intervene on behalf of taxpayers and have Baltimore City Public Schools implement reforms. And with Ben Crump now joining the lawsuit, they hope that could mean real change. The building blocks for life often start at a young age.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Learning your ABCs to read, write, and spell your name.
M, E, S, S, I, A, H.
Their skills, 3-year-old Marcia is already mastering.
H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P.
Skills his grandmother says her 19-year-old son, Kyrie, still struggles with.
He's 19 years old, and he can barely spell his name, first or last name. He can't write his name.
Nicole McDonald says Baltimore City Schools failed Kyrie.
It makes you feel hopeless. In a sense, it kind of feels like the generations are dying.
It's why she found herself here today at a press conference where civil rights pioneer Ben Crump announced he's joining a lawsuit to hold Baltimore City Schools accountable.
I said I could not afford to stand on the sideline and not try to make the system be more accountable to us, especially our children.
He's coming on to the lawsuit led by parents just like Nicole, Giovanni, and Shawanda Patterson. It accuses Baltimore City of forcing taxpayers to fund a school system that underperforms and has a history of grade changing and inflated enrollment numbers.
If we can somehow get everybody to the table here in Baltimore and be transparent and talk about how we can make it better for all of our children, then maybe we can do it in other cities across America.
This comes weeks after the Maryland Inspector General for Education confirmed more than 12,000 failing grades were falsely changed to passing in Baltimore City schools over a 5-year span. That report was launched after a Project Baltimore investigation and now has many calling for criminal charges.
When they don't have a good education, the opportunities are few and minimal, and the jail cell is staring them right in the face.
With a big name like Crump now on the team taking on an even bigger system, McDonald hopes for real change.
I pray. I really pray, because I don't know what else needs to be done.
And a brighter future for not just her grandson, but all the children in Baltimore City schools, so they have those building blocks they need.
This is bigger than us.
For a successful life.
Lion Z, know my ABCs. Next time, won't you sing with me?
That was great. Nice.
The lawsuit is not seeking money, but rather oversight over the Baltimore City public school system. In Baltimore, Maxine Stryker, Fox 45 News.
Robert Patillo, is very significant that Ben Crump decided to take on this crisis that many parents and their kids face all across America, which really has more of a disproportional impact on Black and brown families. And, you know, I was at the press conference, and he made it clear it's something that he really didn't want to do because it's not something his allies felt favorable about, but he realized in his conscience it was a moral issue. It is, he feels, the next civil rights movement. Your thoughts on the significance of this?
Absolutely, and I hope this helps to bring attention to this issue, not just in Baltimore, but in urban school districts around the country. We've seen tremendous amounts of corruption in the American educational system. We've spent years and months on end debating critical race theory, and we're debating transgenders in schools. But what we have not debated is how can we fix the broken American educational system, which is leaving our children far behind the educations people are graduating with in China and India and even Lagos, Nigeria, and other places around the world, and it's going to make it difficult for us to compete on the world stage and maintain our economic and social hegemony within our sphere of influence. What we see in inner city schools is chronic mismanagement, chronic corruption. Here in Atlanta, we had the Atlanta cheating scandal a decade ago, where no matter what reforms are put in, people, instead of trying to fix the actual problem, simply try to line their own pockets, and we have to fix that going forward.
Gabriella, from Young Voices, your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think the Baltimore City school system could benefit from an injection of school choice policies. It sounds very much that the students are being failed by the administrators, parents are being failed by the Baltimore City public school system. And that's why you see parents getting involved in education, demanding transparency, whether they're running for school board or filing lawsuits to demand accountability.
Bruce, this is significant. I mean, I don't know any civil rights leader in my memory that would have had the guts to take a stand. You and I both admit there's not only a crisis in education, there's a crisis in the classroom. And it is definitely, I mean, if you read the Baltimore Sun, you read all the newspapers, I mean, it is as if it was a breath of fresh air. I mean, they took nothing out of context. They told a story. But the thing that Crump said that I think captivated people at the press conference was the fact you can shoot someone, like the cases he's involved in, and they die all of a sudden. He said, but this is a death by 1,000 cuts, and it's still the same and just as deadly for our children.
Absolutely it is. Now, this is not completely novel, Armstrong. Several years ago in California, there's a similar kind of educational malpractice suit brought really against the entire system. It didn't succeed. The teachers' unions are against it. Now, my father was an originator of the idea of a students' union. He believes that the students are the priority of a school system and that they ought to be bargaining at the table how much money goes to teaching, what ought the standards be, how much money goes to the overhead. Because after all, it's their fate that's at issue here, even more than the parents and the administrators. But I think that is kind of the structural reform that you need. Why aren't the students have a voice at the table? They're the ones who are victimized by educational malpractice, but it's just collective bargaining between the teachers and the administrators, where the money goes, who has the tenure, and things like that. But I do think this is essential. It's not just because we need to be internationally competitive with other nations. It's simply an individual human right to be educated. It enables them to participate in power, in politics. And it's a really duty that we all have as adults to make sure that our posterity has that fair chance to succeed. And without education, as Ben Crump said, you know, you're rolling dice if you think you're going to succeed without that kind of ability to speak and write and do fundamental mathematics.
And Gabriella, I think what is often lost in this debate is what happens when they're not educated. The sexual trafficking, the prostitution, the crime, the homicide, no real self-esteem, no real skills to contribute anything to society. And when you don't have real skills to contribute, then you resort to drugs, guns, violence, all the things that Americans are seeing firsthand that are totally disrupting and destroying countries all across, communities all across America.
Absolutely, and an education is the first step for success throughout much of the country, regardless of what zip code you live in, what state you live in. And if students cannot safely go to school and they cannot become prepared for arithmetic, learning the basics to prepare them for life beyond schooling, it's a travesty. And keeping kids trapped in these failing schools is a disservice to the kids of Baltimore and setting them up for disaster going forward. And that's why, like I mentioned earlier, you're seeing parents getting involved, demanding that there's accountability, there's transparency, and that the dollars follow the students to send them to better schools, or to perhaps reform existing schools that are underperforming or vastly failing the students that they're serving. And that's why you see people here in Virginia, and I bet across the country as well, demanding better accountability and reforms across schools, because they are underserving students.
You know, Robert Patillo, on Friday, Brittany Griner pleaded guilty in her case in Russia. I don't think most people who understand how Russian courts work are surprised. But what is her future going forward? And will she be used as a bargaining chip to negotiate the release of people that America have in prison that Russia would like to do an exchange with?
I'm going to take your questions in inverse order. On this issue of a prisoner swap idea, I think that would be abhorrent. I think that would be the biggest foreign policy mistake this administration could make if we begin negotiating with foreign nations, exchanging war criminals for celebrities. Let's understand, I pray for Ms. Grinder, and I hope that everything works out for her in the best. But one of the individuals they're talking about swapping for her is Victor Blut, who is a arms dealer who's been trafficking arms with the FARC, the terrorist in Colombia. They've killed tens of thousands of people. So the idea of releasing him in exchange for a celebrity because there's a social media campaign, I think that disrespects the legacy and the memory of all those people who died because of the weapons that he trafficked. So we have to take American celebrity culture out of foreign policy and make these things happen in turn. With regards to what I believe will happen with Ms. Griner, this will more than likely be part of a plea agreement that she has made in order to plead guilty. She goes back for sentencing or their equivalent sentencing on July 14th. I think we'll see then how much time she will serve. She may get credit for the 100 or so days she served thus far and be released and probably be banned from the country going forward.
What should we all, Robert, I'm going to stay with, I really appreciate your comments because what you're saying is so true. What they're trying to exchange for, I mean, you talk about somebody dangerous. And I don't think the celebrity culture really understand. I don't think they really understand. This is not some moral equivalency. But what should other athletes, celebrities, or whomever, because I watch these shows, these narco shows, where Americans go through Peru and other places, and they get stopped on narcotic charges, and they spend this time in jail. I mean, at some point, we should learn that what the leniency and the rules and the guidelines we have in America stop when we cross on foreign soil.
It's a level of hubris I think we have to get over. I travel internationally a lot, just as you do. And if I'm going to United Arab Emirates or to Oman or to Kuwait, something along those lines, I know I have to follow their rules when I get there. Just like if you go to somebody's house and they say no shoes on in the house, you might think that's a dumb rule coming from where you are, but that is their house. They get to make their rules. So you have to abide by those things going forward. I think back to that case in the 90s where you had the American teenager who was vandalizing cars in the Philippines and ended up getting caned. That's just what happens there. And for people who say, well, it's just a marijuana oil or whatever it is, if you went back in America 10 years ago, that would have been a felony in the United States of America, and a foreign national coming to this country trying to sneak marijuana oil through the TSA would have got him prison time. So to act like this is somehow outside of the realm of possibility, that was just a few years ago in this country, so I don't understand the outrage. Just because someone can bounce a ball does not mean they get special privileges.
And we will be back. So, Attorney Fein, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is resigning, but he's not stepping down as Prime Minister. Explain this to our listeners.
Well, the Conservative Party is the one that decides, who the leader is, and right now there isn't a clear consensus as to who will replace Boris Johnson. So we kind of have an interregnum, if you will, where he says he's going to be quitting, but the Conservative Party now will have to meet and coalesce around a new leader. There isn't anyone who immediately jumps out that's going to command a consensus. So I think he just needs to stay because you got to have some decision maker. You can't have an acephalous political party. I do think that his resignation is going to lead to substantial amount of jostling amongst the Conservative Party. I think he was able to stay in power so long despite the many blunders and lies about the parties and COVID, precisely because the remainder of the Conservative Party was so divided. So I think we'll be in a period of some time with political instability there, which is not really very useful in terms of Johnson's effort to get the European Union to accede some kind of differential trade relations with Northern Ireland, and how Britain will more integrate, if at all, into NATO or not when it's left the European Union.
Robert, our president travels next week to Israel and Saudi Arabia. Obviously, he once referred to Saudi Arabia as a pariah state, but he's going because he needs to negotiate just about anything to lower the oil prices. But the Saudis also want their leader to be shielded from this lawsuit by Khashoggi's fiance. What do you expect the president to accomplish from this trip versus what the president is hoping to accomplish?
Well, I think it's a two-pronged approach that he has to take. One, he has, during the trip to Israel, we all understand the political instability that has taken place there, where we've had the resignation, the removal of the primary party. People want Netanyahu back all of a sudden, even though he was just drummed out of power. So he's going to try to normalize our relationship with Israel as it relates to their political situation there. I think when it comes to the Middle East, what President, and particularly Saudi Arabia, what President Biden has to do is articulate that we are no longer going to be bent over a barrel by OPEC and their oil-making decisions. He has to project an image of strength. I think you have to continue to support the family of Khashoggi. We have to stop letting these petrol states control the United States of America and our foreign policy. And I think what we saw from the previous administration was far too much of a willingness to do whatever it took to cozy up to these dictators around the world in order for economic gains. I think the American people want a president and want an administration that stands for something, and standing for human rights is one of those things that we elected Joe Biden to do. So I'm hoping that will be the image that he portrays overseas.
You know, Gabrielle, here at home, the party is not trying to hide their discontent with the president and the fact that he's causing them so much bloodshed in all the elections that have taken place so far in these different midterms across the country. Obviously, there are minefields for President Biden going overseas and what he negotiates, because he seems determined not to alienate the progressive wing of his party. How does he navigate it all?
He's proving to have a difficult time navigating all the different challenges, ranging from inflation to exhausting the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to dealing with intra-party fighting in the Democratic side. And if he doesn't have a cohesive message and he's lost the trust of people within his own party, and you even see staff members of his start to leave in droves, much of his communications staff is no longer there. Only one of the original women who were tapped to join his communications team remains. All the rest have left. So if you have your communications arm leaving, you have greater distrust brewing within your own party, and you're going abroad and you're not addressing these problems at home, you're going to be perceived as a weak leader. So I don't know how he can overcome these challenges.
How does he continue to confront the housing crisis that is upon us? Inflation continues to rise. There's very little hope that he gets from the economy. What can give him an advantage between now and November? Gabriella?
If he moderates his tone and he starts to work with Republicans on meaningful bipartisan legislation, or perhaps peeling back on some of the extreme environmental policies that he's pursued, supporting lower taxes, decreasing spending, perhaps he can build up confidence instead of obviously dividing the country more, and actually one way bringing people together with disapproval of how he is running the country.
You know, Bruce, one thing she mentioned was the energy. Do you think people really understand the significance of the Supreme Court EPA ruling last week before it adjourned until their fall session?
Well, I doubt it, because the impact is not immediate. Like, it's not going to drive the price of oil or gasoline up and down, 50 cents or anything like that. I think what the decision did was say that the administration really is handcuffed unless they can go to Congress and get the authority to impose these regulations, which they are intending to diminish rather than increase, I think, the supply of fossil fuels, which is, in the short run, going to be necessary in order to keep any economy going and to have the price of gasoline stay below $5 or $6 a gallon. So it's typical that court decisions have a delayed impact, not always as with the Dobbs case and the abortion case or the gun case, but in these larger economic cases there won't be an immediate, I think, feedback into the system. I do think that Biden can't do really anything that's going to cure, if you will, the energy shortages. Even Saudi Arabia increasing the supply is peanuts compared to the sanctions we are imposing upon both Russia and Iran, taking millions of barrels of oil per day off of the international oil market for national security purposes. And when you ask, well, what could happen between now and Election Day that could give Biden a boost? Because I agree, personally and institutionally, he's very weak. And this is where we could see, an October surprise over China and Taiwan. In times of foreign policy crisis, the country ordinarily rallies around the president, and with regard to China, there's almost universal fear and efforts to try to isolate it in the Congress. And the president has already, on 3 occasions, with a slip of the tongue, said, "I'll defend Taiwan if China attacks," which has caused China to use rather menacing words in response. So that's always an ever-present danger there. And China could be emboldened depending upon what happens in Ukraine.
Robert, mentioning Ukraine, with all the massacres and all the other crises that Americans are facing here at home, there's very little about the Russian-Ukraine crisis compared to what it was at the beginning. Just where are we? And it seems as though there is still no ceasefire in sight.
You're right. There is no end in sight. And I think this goes along with Russian military tactics. I think at the beginning of the war, the military advisors in Moscow convinced Putin they could do almost a blitzkrieg toward Kiev and take the country completely within a couple of days. Once that bogged down, they went back to the same thing he did in Chechnya in 1999, the same thing they did in Georgia in 2008, where they just simply used the world's largest fleet of artillery, which Russia possesses, to bomb cities into complete ruins. And they've taken most of the Donbass. I think they took the last city in Luhansk within the last week. They have already taken upwards the southern parts of the country connected to the Crimean Peninsula. It looks like Russia's attempting to do a move where they simply move over, take Odessa, and create a corridor between mainland Russia and Moldova, which is also a puppet state of the Kremlin, so that they will have direct access to Europe, not just to Belarus to the north, but also in a corridor to Moldova in the south to take those petroleum assets, which are really propping up their country. So because Russia has the advantage of manpower and military arms and financing, it's only a matter of time before Ukraine has to come to the table with territorial concessions in order to end the bloodshed.
Gabriella, do you think the United States will commit more billions of dollars to the humanitarian crisis?
It looks to be the case. There's discussions that are underway, but the American people have concerns if those monies are going to go directly to war efforts. That's a big concern. But we also have to look a little bit beyond Ukraine. Russia has machinations in Kaliningrad, which borders Lithuania. They've been trying to threaten Article 5 countries like Lithuania, where my family actually hails from. And we have to worry even beyond that because of Putin's ambitions to reassert itself more prominently in countries it illegally occupied last century. But we will likely see more money appropriated. It just is a matter of, is it going to be stewarded well? And especially with kind of this displeasure now we're seeing among the American public, unfortunately, about whether or not this conflict will end soon. But I still think there is an appetite for supporting Ukraine prevailing over Russia given their aggressive tendencies.
Gabrielle, I want to thank you and Attorney Patillo so much for joining us. I appreciate your insights. Bruce will stay with us. Marcia, Dyson, and others will join us at the return following these breaks. How do you think, since the Dobbs decision, that the politics of the midterm election, which is geared towards the presidential election, is going to play out for both Democrats and Republicans. And here's what's fascinating. I follow polls, a lot of the polls. And one of the things that is fascinating, you've had all this media reporting on abortion. Women rights have been forever taken away. You even had Deborah Messenger and other celebrities and the Kardashians during the 4th of July weekend saying we should cancel the 4th of July weekend because women no longer have freedom. And everywhere you turn, it's all about women. And then then it turns to guns. We're unleashing more guns, and we have all this violence and all these massacres. But yet, the polls show it's having no impact. It's giving Biden nor any other candidates any advantage. In fact, Biden's numbers are still sinking. What is missing here, Bruce?
Well, we just have many different influences on elections. And the one that affects everybody is the economy, prices. Inflation is soaring, interest rates are rising, the stock market is down, so people are concerned about, where's the next paycheck coming from? Now, I have a personal, window into at least some of the politics here because I walk in front of the Supreme Court to and from my office every day. And if I'm just to extrapolate from seeing the demonstrations, which are virtually daily, there certainly has awakened amongst the Democrats, if you will, a more vocal, if you will, and sustained support for abortion rights. Now, whether that translates into actual votes, we don't know, because they say there are other elements that come into play here. And I think that's the big unknown. I think Donald Trump himself said that he was worried after the Dobbs decision that white suburban women could be lost to the Republican Party. And he's a pretty good head counter. And on that score, I think it's really unknown right now. I do think that we will see aggressive efforts by the Biden administration to use the Federal Food and Drug Administration to preempt state laws that are trying to block women in states that do not permit abortion to obtain access to pills that are shipped out of state. And that will be a next legal frontier that I think the country will confront.
Professor Marcia Dyson joins us now via Skype. Would you say that the media has overblown the issue of abortion in women, the issue of guns, and those issues could have an impact if the economy was not so way down, really in the toilet? And because when you're dealing with pocketbook issues and people's way of lives and putting gas in their vehicles and paying for a little extra and going on vacation, I mean, those issues don't seem to have the impact when you're dealing with real issues that they confront them every day.
Right. I think the media, of course, when you hear a lot of noise, you think it's a general consensus or that it's the majority of individuals who feel that way or respond in that particular manner. But I don't believe that to be true, because there are a lot of pockets of women that I interact with, first and foremost. They are concerned about Roe versus Wade, the elimination of it, but a lot of them don't really know the real history around it. So when you have half information, then you respond in a halfway that doesn't really get you at the end goal that you want. If you really want a good foundation based upon your interests, then know all the information first and foremost. And at the second time, too, when it comes to the guns, we know, that the guns we have 529 million guns on the streets of the United States of America with a population of 320. And a third of those individuals cannot possibly even handle a weapon or may not have them themselves. So it feels like in so many instances that the train has moved past the station and we're left with this mess. And it took us too long to clean it up, right? And some people get upset with me when it comes to Roe versus Wade, that some kind of responsibilities it has to be taken upon the individual themselves. And I'm not talking about women who are raped, right, or women who cannot afford it. But I think the thing is, my body, my choice, I believe in that. I don't know if I believe in that the government should pay for it, which is a kind of touchy situation. But I think that inflation really has everybody heated before the summertime heat wave, that the inflation, the desperation around the gas prices, the shortage of foods that we see on the, or the lack thereof on the food shelves, also exacerbating our emotions, whether it's around guns, whether it's around Roe versus Wade, whether it's around anything. I think we're all so, not so much emotional. We have a right to be, the women have a right to be. If you believe in that, you should have the Roe versus Wade reinstated. But everything is just so intense now that we're like firecrackers before the 4th of July all over this nation.
I want to read something to you. I want to get your response to this. This just came out. The teachers union in Chicago, which is part of where your heart is, is holding a vote that would change the word mother in contracts to birthing parent for the purpose of being inclusive to the LGBTQI community. Now, listen to this. The union states, using this contract language, members need not worry about how a Board of Education solicitor defines maternity leave, mother and or father. The language is an inclusive reflection of how LGBTQIA plus member build families. That's what the proposed resolution said. I mean, are they trying to destroy the family? Are they trying to change the definition of women? Are they trying to get respect? And this is not something that gives them respect. I mean, what is going on here? With all the things that are going on, change your mother to birthing parent?
It's really becoming a confusing time, which shows you, I'm just going to blame it. You know, there's a song, Blame It on the Alcohol. I would like to say, let's blame everything on inflation, but no, this is not an inflation situation. I think that what we should try to reduce is the labeling of ourselves rather than adding on those extra burdens of social construct. The only biological person that can give birth is a woman. And for millennium, I mean, since the beginning of time, the word for that individual that can give birth to a child is mother. Now, sometimes if you're sensitive about that, then people need to get more tough-skinned around that as well. Because if so, we're going to become so deluded into who we are and what we're fighting for, that the real challenges that we have, which has nothing to do with a label, right? And not to be offensive to the queer or gay, lesbian, or whatever communities. That's not the issue. They were all born, everybody was born from a mother who is a woman, and that's the end of the story. So if people want to trivialize who they are, if they want to increase more labels, then that is really, to me, very destructive, and it's not really at all enhancing the sense of our humanity. We have so many labels that I forget who you are. You're not going to say, you know, go save that person. If that, you know, you're looking for a mother, right? Or go save this individual. You're looking for somebody's binary label. We are all human beings. And I think that to just reduce us to all these labels is telling, it's destructive, and it really is divisive. And I get it. Everybody wants to be seen and everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants their issues on the forefront. But there are things that are collective for all of us. And that's the involvement of our humanity. And if we just push for all of our rights, which some people say that's the reason why, you know, K Street in here in DC exists, because not every individual can have their rights given that attention. I understand that, but we're talking about getting real down to the nitty gritty, not this nitty gritty to me.
Bruce, what do you foresee? There are some cases that the Supreme Court has decided to see when it returns in the fall, particularly dealing with the legislature. Yeah. What do you foresee?
The case that's now attracted all the attention is one that would potentially prohibit state constitutions, state judiciaries determining and implementing state election laws, and turn that over to the federal judges. It was an idea that was first broached in a concurring opinion by Chief Justice Rehnquist in Bush v. Gore, but it's kind of been dormant for 20 years. But it is a response, I think, to recent elections where state judiciaries have interpreted state constitutions and state administrative bodies to depart, if you will, from the express language of a state statute in deciding who is properly elected as a presidential elector. It doesn't mean it will always favor Republicans for the short run. It would if you just look backward in the 2020 election, but that's, that one will have enormous political impact.
You know, finally, Marcia, before we say goodbye to you and Bruce, what wisdom would you give the President of the United States to at least stop the bleeding and find issues that Americans could really rally around and support him?
If I could get a message to President Biden and his total administration, is how do we save America? And how do we save it intelligently, wisely, and economically, which right now is not happening. And also, when I say that, we have to look at the budgets and what they're choosing over. And I heard you guys talk about the Ukraine war, and I know what it means, you know, foreign affairs, fighting back the big bear Russia, but we are really hurting right now. We really have a big war in America on our streets. So I think we should choose wisely which war we're going to fight and what is the real enemy at our gate. When we have mass shootings and our people are terrorized, they can't go to a church, you can't go to a school, you can't even go to a gas station, and you're looking up at a snipers. I think we need to bring some of our stuff back stateside. And I know that that is antithetical to our foreign diplomacy, but we really need to look at that to make sure it's not a Vietnam War.
When we return, Dr. Bryan Donohue and Tess Inman will be joining us. Let us say goodbye to Marcia. Bruce Fein, it's always a pleasure. We'll be back. Dr. Bryan Donohue, let us welcome you and Tess Inman to the show. Please explain to us what monkeypox is and whether or not it is a gay disease.
Well, Armstrong, it's always great to see you, and thanks for having me again. So monkeypox, many of your viewers will remember smallpox. So smallpox is a virus that has largely been eradicated. But if you live long enough, round the bend come these same things in some ways reincarnated. That's monkeypox. So monkeypox was originally described way back in the 1950s. It actually didn't come from monkeys. It came from rodents. But like so many of these viruses, Armstrong, that we've talked about over the years, in these animal reservoirs, there's easy transfer from one to another. And here, monkeys became infected initially, again, in the 1950s. Danish investigators identified this. And as it turns out, over the years that have followed, intermittently, there have been these spreads now into human beings of this virus. It is, as it turns out, a disease of close contact. Don't be thinking so much here about the coronavirus, which is, again, an aerosolized mist. This is close physical contact. So there have been several outbreaks, well publicized, principally in Canada, of men engaging in sex with other men who might have had this infection. And it does turn out that contact is very much facilitates spread. It's not, though, fair to say that this is a disease of gay men. Again, the same vector, close contact, can spread it to any potential individual. So while it did show up in large numbers and in these large outbreaks among gay men, it is by no means confined to gay men. It is not, if you will, a gay disease.
Give us the latest on COVID. We always hear that it's surging, but I got to tell you, very few people I talk to, and I've been around the world in the last 2 or 3 weeks just about, nobody's talking about COVID anymore. Nobody's wearing masks. They don't, and when you travel abroad now, you don't even have to take the PCR test, depending on mostly where you're going.
You're right, and Armstrong, you'll remember that this is what has been thought to be the likely course of travel for COVID over from the early days. Our goal has never been to eliminate COVID. It's not a likely outcome. On the other hand, in the early days, you'll remember back in the winter and spring of 2020, the goal was not to die of COVID, and that's still largely the case. And so the vaccines have been very helpful in converting the disease from a potentially life-threatening disease to a more modest disease. And as that transition has occurred, the other thing that's occurred is the virus has shown itself in a variety of new variants. And in general, those new variants are less virulent than the original Delta infection. So these things have happened. A, we've developed vaccines so people are not experiencing life-threatening issues. B, we've gotten new treatments. C, the virus has itself morphed over the years so as to be less virulent, which takes us to where we are now, which is D, which is where this is largely endemic in a large population. We're going to live with it. It's kind of like the noisy neighbors next door. At first, it makes you crazy, but after a time, you don't so much hear the music or the cars coming in and out of the driveway. So in some ways, we've reached an equilibrium with this disease, and that's exactly what you would have expected even those 2 years ago, Armstrong.
You know, Ms. Inman, I mean, the number of massacres, homicides, and shootings and killings, it seems like I don't know if we've ever experienced anything like this. And everybody seems, when all the smoke clears, they begin to talk about mental illness. I wanted to have you on today to discuss with us, are we talking about mental illness in the right way?
Well, thank you for having me so much. I think it's a great question to ask. And unfortunately, I think we're still in a culture in our society of addressing mental health when it's too late. I think we need to be proactive, and we need to normalize taking kids to see a therapist, to talk about their feelings so they feel emotionally safe, so they can learn those coping skills, because we don't have a lot of control over the things that we are exposed to right now when it comes to mass shootings, gun violence, things of that nature.
But then, based on what you just said, then everybody needs to be in therapy.
I would agree. Yes, I think that therapy is a chance for all of us to talk to someone who's not in our everyday life, who can give us an unbiased perspective, help us process our feelings. Our mental health, our feelings is correlated with our physical health. So if we address our physical health, then I think it's only natural that we address our mental health as well.
Then why is it that 90% of the people that probably have these issues, or maybe 95%, never commit these crimes, and 80% of them would never think about committing these crimes? Why such a small percentage?
Sure. Well, I think that there is a lot of heavy mental health that goes into kind of the diagnosis of someone that might carry out something like a mass shooting. The big thing about the mental health effect of mass shootings is the systemic effects on all of us, from teachers, students, to even, anyone out on the street. Over the weekend with the shooting at the 4th of July parade, it feels like we can't even leave our own homes.
Yeah, but we can make the argument 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there was not even nearly this kind of mental illness. And I'm not going to say humankind is any different today, except maybe you saying that social media and these headlines and these copycats are emboldening people, making them more depressed. What is so different today with mental illness than what it was 50 or 100 years ago?
Well, in my opinion, I think we're just acknowledging it more now. I think mental illness has always been a struggle, but there's always been a stigma against it, that we think that we're weaker if we acknowledge a struggle that we have, especially if it's not physical, because a mental health disorder is not something that we can see as easily. So I think now it's more prevalent because we're talking about it more, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't always been there.
But if these kids are writing manifestos, are adults on their websites, don't you feel they should be arrested immediately and put away for a while?
Well, I think that there definitely needs to be some kind of intervention, some way to see these children, adults, whomever, and to work with them on the mental health side with a professional, that, you know, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists. It's a cry for help, and it is a way that we can intervene to try to help this person.
Dr. Donohue, your input, I'm sure where you are in Pittsburgh, you deal with mental illness on the hour.
Absolutely, Armstrong. And the things that I would add to what Tess has said to date are that if we looked at this just kind of in an epidemiologic way, we asked the same questions of mass shooting that you just asked me about COVID and monkeypox, we might find that there are new ingredients in the mix. That is to say that if we thought that the degree of affective illness, that means mental illness across the board, is a steady state in humankind, what is it now that has created this outcropping of violence? It isn't guns. There were far more guns per capita in America 40 years ago than there are now. I would pose that these young men, these skulking young men in their 18 to 25th year of life, whether they're doing a carjacking in Brooklyn or, God forbid, doing a school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, or Texas, or here in Highland Park, Illinois, one of the things that's new is the degradation of the sovereignty of the family. And Freud made the point in his own life, as Tess will recall, as to the way in which we develop what he called superego, meaning our sense of position in society, what those of us in the Catholic faith tradition might refer to as conscience. One of the fundamental elements, as Dr. Freud described it, in the development of that sense is father. And so I'm concerned that as we see the family erode at its margins, and in particular, the father be enucleated from the family across a variety of societal domains, that creates a new expression of humankind. And it makes mental illness, I think, much harder to detect, probably increases the prevalence of it, and is maybe a bit of an unexamined piece here as we think to ourselves, what is the answer to the question that Armstrong just asked, which is, what's new? And a hard look at the family might be a helpful place to start.
Dr. Inman?
So I agree, but I would like to add a different perspective of that as well, is that we are still dealing with the global trauma that is COVID, that a global pandemic, what the mental health effects are on us now, and then we are added violence. Roe v. Wade, I know, is very divisive right now, but we have to remember that when we experience a traumatic event, our brain changes, the chemistry of our brain changes. So our ability to cope with new traumas is going to be affected. So I think that's another reason why we're seeing an increase in mental health disparities in a lot of our communities, because we are all burnt out and we are traumatized by what we've gone through in the last two and a half years.
I remember when the Black Plague hit Europe, it lasted almost 300 years. Dr. Donohue, is it that the world is more traumatized today than it ever has been?
So the philosophers have always made the point that it's a fool's errand to try and compare experiences one to the other, or our experience now compared to what happened in London in the 1630s. On the other hand, I don't think it's the case that the aggregate experience of trauma is new. I think there's a new fragility. Armstrong, it's like this in infectious disease when we see a new virus, take the AIDS virus. The initial thought in the 1800s, well, let's look at the virus and figure out all about the virus. In the new era, we look more at the host. What is there about the host that renders the host susceptible to the virus? Likewise here, look, Columbine occurred years before COVID, And we know that the occurrence of these disastrous things is not something that's new on the landscape. So what is it that has facilitated all of this? And in any case, what are some practical approaches we can take to begin maybe thinking about solutions? And I think one of them is to look at our own experience. We do well in all aspects of life when we rise up from a nutritive soil. So the wise farmer plants the seed in the warm, nutritive soil, and up comes the good crop. The good soil here might be where we grow up, our families. I think it's hard to argue that there has not been this erosive effect on the family over the last 20 years. It's provocative and interesting to ask whether that erosive effect on the family has given rise to all these new nightmares which have come to afflict us on a nearly weekly basis now. In any case, it's a testable premise. It's something that's new.
And that is the question that we should ask. It goes back to the family. Thank all of you for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.